Okay, last year we had a really big interview with Jeff Green. It moved the market. The trade desk stock went up 20% after my conversation. No, it didn't. It went down 20%, obviously. So Andrew was on the stage afterwards. Obviously, Jeff isn't here this year because he's too busy trying to put up his stock price. So Andrew's kindly come back this year to talk about the state of play in the whole industry. As you know, as you've seen in the last two panels, the industry's in flux. There's a huge change going on, and we're here to discuss that today. And Andrew's been a year since we sat on this stage, and it was fun last year. What's changed? What's changed in your life? You look good, hey, in fairness. You been working out?
A little bit. Yeah. Well, what's nice is this year I'm not coming right off a red eye after testifying, so that's a big change.
Oh dear. There's a lot of disappointed people after the remedies on the search trial, but we can talk about that in a minute.
We'll talk about that in a minute. What's changed? Like I'd say what we talked about last year, which just if you weren't around in the audience, we were talking about very early growth and progression in what the market refers to as curation and what we refer to as sell-side decisioning, but just the premise of value inversion, getting closer to the edge of the impression, the publisher and the sell side. But I think what started as kind of a cottage industry of curators where supply and data were being married together to package and create new value has sort of in the last year gone from that to a full-blown industry movement where we're seeing just about every category of company in ad tech now jumping in. Data companies, publishers, agencies, platforms. There's entirely new categories of company that are forming themselves around the premise of custom bidding algorithms, building models at the edge to drive performance. Across index, this time last year, we had maybe 50 companies transacting this way. This time, a year later, we're at over 200. So yeah, I think we're kind of at a point now where this is becoming a full-on industry movement.
And it's not just a thing, like it was almost as a cottage industry. It's actually a shift in the whole industry. We did a sketch there about the unbundling of ad tech, and it does feel like this unbundling is happening in front of our eyes. And to your point, that we're seeing new businesses pop up, new categories, like so the algorithmic piece, the signal companies, the agentic companies, although still very nascent. But it does feel like a real shift in the space.
There's just so many examples, just as you said. Like if I were to kind of frame it, on one hand in custom bidding, you've got companies like Chalice, Cognitive Empowered. You've got agencies doing very similar things right now within their own divisions. So Omnicom has Analect, WPP has Choreograph, Publicis has Core AI. They all have data science teams looking at developing their own models. You have new flavors of this as well from the publisher side. So it's almost like the newest version of audience extension, where take a company like The Weather Company, who has incredible data to understand what's going on in the world around us. Typically, their source of supply, where their apps or their website, they're not necessarily in the streaming business, but they're now leveraging this exact opportunity to take their data and marry it with streaming, so now they can sell streaming at scale, which is pretty cool. You've got this also intersecting with AI, where the models that I speak of are trained by neural nets, the same technology that powers LLMs or powering next-level performance. You've also got Gen AI jumping into the mix, reimagining the way high-impact creative works, because the closer you are to supply, the better you understand the slot, and the more you can ultimately find new opportunities to fuse really cool creative executions with the best opportunities on the sell side. So yeah, there's just too many examples now to cite. And what started as perhaps a cottage industry is absolutely just a fundamental change in the way the market transacts.
And yet there is still this friction between supply and demand. There was a blog post the other day about how the trade desk is reclassifying SSPs as resellers in the, is it Cockeye or Kokai? What's the platform called? All right. I always get it mixed up. Sorry, trade desk. That was not intentional, by the way. But genuinely, that was not intentional. But it is what it is. It happened. I'll just own it. But that friction still remains, right? How is an SSP a reseller now? That's interesting.
I've got a lot to share on this particular subject. I'll try to break it down into a few different pieces. Like the first thing that I'll say is, like typical ad tech, there is some truth to that characterization in certain aspects of the supply chain or the SSP category. There's a lot of companies in ad tech that purport to be an SSP that are not, that are of dubious value at best, that certainly take more than the value that they create, that are at distance to the publisher, that you should frame correctly as a reseller. But that cohort does not universally speak for the category. And I think labeling every SSP the same way is frankly just a little bit ignorant. I think the only part of this market that gets to decide whether or not a vendor is a reseller is the customer. And if you ask the media owner what their relationship is to Index, or even say a Magnite, I don't think that they would agree that we're resellers. For starters, we have very thick MSAs with a lot of contractual obligations that we have to put forth to even land those deals. We pay them directly. There are no hops between us. We integrate directly into the closest origin of supply that they have. But more importantly, we're strategic partners. We're read into their parts of their business. We're a part of their sales channel, and we're building technology to support their businesses. That's not what a reseller is. And so I think there's a bit of liberal universal labeling of there are issues in the supply chain with this definition that just doesn't match reality. The second thing that I'll say, though, because this trend is also connected to just this general premise that the DSP is subsidizing, I should say, commoditizing the SSP. And I think what a lot of people miss there is, for starters, the DSP makes a lot more money than the SSP. And so if a DSP is going to reprice the cost of supply acquisition or activation, markets always reform around an equilibrium. And so the only way you can pull that off is if you're making more money somewhere else. And the reality is a lot of DSPs make an awful lot of money in data and activating data. And so what we're also starting to see is in a market where supply and demand move into the same platform, transparency suffers and customers ask a lot of questions. And they're putting a lot of pressure now on cost, because even when supply and demand live in the same platform, dollar from left to right doesn't look the same. And that's why we're starting to find a lot of growing use cases shift to the supply side, where just as a DSP can change the activations of supply acquisition, we can change the economics of data, decisioning, and all kinds of other things. And I think we're kind of in that mode right now where things are going to ping-pong along in the market until we eventually hit this resting place of a super efficient transactional model. We're just not there yet.
When will that happen?
Tomorrow. One more day.
Right, one more day.
I think we're going to be in this for a few years, to be perfectly frank. I think it's going to ping pong back and forth, and there's all kinds of really sophisticated A/B tests that people can do right now with ease. If you believe everything that a DSP says with respect to their own supply chain, which we would argue is self-preferencing, use it. But at the same time, move a lot of those features to the sell side and compare the difference. Compare the net eCPM, compare the actual amount of ad spend that goes to working media. And I think when people start to make those comparisons, the reality is far removed from the narrative. And I think the narrative that cutting out an SSP is somehow inherently more efficient is ignorant to the other counter narrative, which is it actually just recreates the black box of yesterday. There's a pretty significant investigation right now into what happens when you self-preference supply.
What investigation is that?
Well, it's in the U.S. I don't know. It's in a lot of headlines. I have to read into it, but we've seen this before, so I don't think that the market is unaware of that fact. Right. And I think what this is all about is cost. I think programmatic net end to end is too expensive.
Finally, someone actually said that. This industry is all about economics. Why does everybody think about innovation? It's all about money. At the end of the day, it's cash.
It is all about money, and I think the marketers fed up, and so it's putting pressures on the market to respond, and the market's responding. And we don't know where this is going to end, but we're certainly well on our way into it right now.
Right. There's going to be a bunch of panels later on to discuss the unbundling piece. You touched on the big G there. We can't not talk about the big G because I just get berated by Rob Webster about lobster lunches all the time on LinkedIn about how wrong I am about my predictions. I mean, I've been predicting the Google breakup since 2010. It's been filling rooms out, my anti-Google bashing. It's been great for business. But where are we at with this now? Google was labeled a monopoly in search in effective, you got a slap in the wrist. Oh my God, I got away scot-free, effectively, right? They can still do their exclusive deals as long as they're the highest bidder. They still have Chrome. I don't really care about that, right? But it's the ad tech piece. What happens there? The remedies are coming, apparently, in the next couple of weeks. The EU basically, I don't even know what they did. They were scared by Trump, issued a fine that'll never be paid. There's no divestiture. But do you think that we will see some kind of divestiture from a Google perspective? And does it even matter now? Just give us that viewpoint.
Just to frame it, there are two totally separate trials. The search trial is completely separate from the ad tech trial in every way. I think the bar on divesting Chrome and Android was pretty high, and certainly it didn't go that way in the verdict reached. The ad tech trial moves to remedies in 2 weeks. So the timing of ATS is a little different this year. Had it been in 2 weeks, I'd be coming fresh off a red eye as well, because I'm due back in Virginia the Monday after next, which will be quite interesting. I do think we can expect a divestiture of some aspect of the ad tech stack on the Google side. I think the case is very strong. It's a lot stronger than I'd argue the search case was.
So strong.
We're going to know soon.
So strong that everybody seems to be suing Google, which is interesting. We'll not talk about that on stage, obviously, because there's pending trials, including my own, which I'll make public next week. Joking, obviously a joke. I'm not suing Google, don't worry. Let's talk about this new pocket of innovation, right? You have been sort of pushing this pretty aggressively internally within the business. This sort of narrative around increased compute and what it means for the industry. Talk about that from an index engineering perspective, because I think it's fascinating and has huge relevance for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, time is this really interesting concept in programmatic that hasn't moved much until recently. When the first programmatic transactions were taking place and probably presentations were hitting the ATS stage 10 years ago or 12 years ago, we all talked about back then the incredible achievement that was running an auction in 200 milliseconds in the blink of an eye, and it was incredibly impressive back then. But if you look at the advancements in computing technology since that, it's not impressive anymore. 200 milliseconds is actually pretty slow. And a significant chunk of that time was really just the exit and entry time of moving a transaction off and on the internet. Latency is actually pretty slow. Light speed's pretty slow. If you look at where we're at today with what's enabling sell-side decisioning and curation at the edge of the impression, part of the reason why we're able to do this is because we're able to move so much faster. In about 10 milliseconds, we can do today what we used to do in 200. And a lot of that is because most of the compute happens right at the edge of the impression. What's kind of interesting, though, is this is starting to move us into what will presumably be the next chapter of time in this market, where we've always clocked ourselves based on milliseconds. We have sort of this new frontier of time emerging, at least with an index and index engineering, which is for the first time we're now measuring transactions in microseconds. And it's kind of fun in that they're about 100 times faster than a millisecond, but it's warranted. If you've only got 10 milliseconds to measure, you don't have a lot of resolution, you don't have a lot of observability, and you've got to go deeper. And I think this is another sign of the market continuing to progress, because time, quite frankly, in the compute context is money. We're getting faster, and so we're becoming more computationally efficient. As a result, we're going to move to new time measurements as well. But before we, high-five ourselves about to move into the ecosystem that is governed by microseconds, we still have a long way to go. Because if you look at finance, which is sort of the bar that we hold ourselves to, finance measures itself in nanoseconds. So maybe, ATS 2030, we'll be talking about nanoseconds. But for now, we're about to take the shift into micro from milli, which is pretty cool.
What does that mean from an innovation point of view? If you can reduce the time of a transaction, what does that actually mean for companies building around that?
It's all cost. It's basically the same economic comment as earlier. So if you process something computationally faster, it means you require less cycles, and cycles are directly proportionate to cost. And so as we find new opportunities to get faster and faster and faster, it does mean the transactional cost of programmatic is going to keep dropping, which I think is a good thing in the end, because it means getting more ad spend to working media.
This segues nicely into the next question, is sticking with the compute and cloud piece. We often moan about higher ad tech taxes, always about ad tech taxes. But the reality is we've been paying a hidden cloud tax, right, to the AWSs and the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, right? So let's talk about that for a minute, because we're almost like paying this sort of like VAT, if you will, like on everything, right? So you pay a value-added tax in Canada and in the UK. You don't pay it in America, which is Trump's pretty angry about. But anyway, that's another day's crack. But this hidden cloud tax piece, talk a wee bit about that, and what does that mean for adtech? And because we seem to rely on these three massive players, and they're all obviously competing against the rest of us, right? Google, good example, and a lot of people are probably using Google's cloud infrastructure. AWS and Amazon, despite its pretends to be an independent play, is a monopoly in e-commerce. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, the cloud is a really interesting dynamic that I don't think we talk a lot about. And I would make the argument that the public clouds are the most profitable businesses in ad tech today. And if you think about it, it starts to make a lot of sense when you look at them as a toll booth that's priced into ad tech. Every single time an impression renders or a transaction is processed that leverages the cloud to process its compute, it's almost like there's a toll station. And the toll is paid whether or not a transaction occurs. And so I think when the market was smaller and operated at less scale, it was less relevant. Also, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, when the cloud was a lot newer, it was priced not just at a convenience upcharge, but actually at an efficient upcharge to kind of compel people to move their infrastructure over. But we're living today in the age of AI where the pressures on the cloud have never been higher. There's more use cases than ever. The cost of the cloud keeps going up. Every year it's a new renewal up. And it's become, if not the number one, the number two line item for most companies in ad tech. And so there are real implications to that when you think about the business models of companies in ad tech, where that is a priced-in cost that just keeps going up. If you marry that with the transactional dynamics of the open internet, there is so much supply that hits those tolls, and sometimes the supply hits the tolls not once, but 10 or 100 times. You end up in a scenario where AWS and GCP make a lot of money indirectly on ad tech. I think now...
How do you reduce that cost? I mean, everybody in this room will be nodding their head, especially from an ad tech perspective, because AWS is a huge cost for most people running an ad tech business.
Yeah, well, it's what's driving this really interesting shift to more and more decisions on the sell side. If you go, I'd use the custom bidding algorithm company example. If you look at what a couple of those companies are now doing, when they develop models and they train neural nets on all of the transactional data that their marketers have, fused with whatever data sets that they've integrated, they build these really, really smart models that can kind of take a look at any impression on the internet and make a really smart decision for a brand. The thing is, if you looked at that business in the old ad tech way of running those models in the public cloud, we would put the custom bidding algorithm companies out of business if we sent the internet fire hose into an endpoint on AWS or GCP to say, hey, is this an interesting opportunity for Nike or what have you? Instead, those models actually run on top of index on our infrastructure at impression time. And so as a result, we've cut down that time, that distance, but we've also cut down the cost to run the models. And so we can make something that historically was cost prohibitive actually very efficient. I think this is going to become the more and more common way we start to build ad tech companies, which is build on top of the infrastructure of ad tech instead of building on the public cloud and get away from that tax.
Is that the general direction of Index, like the ad tech cloud company? Is that how ATC? Well, is that your ticker for next year's IPO?
That is the ticker for next year's IPO at Index. Laurie, our CMO, is here. That is absolutely not a fair statement. She will decide. But what I will say is we kind of find ourselves in this place where we can challenge all the status quos of the market. We can challenge, if you think SSP to DSP, where value originates. Most value historically was in the DSP. Is that going to be the case for long? I don't think so, especially in a world where everybody wants more efficiency. We historically saw ad tech operate at great distance, where most ad tech was homed in public clouds at great cost and expense. Is that going to be the case forever? I don't think so. There's a long-standing precedent for verticalized clouds as well. This is very common in SaaS businesses. This is is very common in finance. If anything, ad tech is late to this. And if you just think of it from a pure efficiency perspective, if we're already present on effectively every transaction on the open internet, why access that a second time and compel the same cost, not just compute, but also bandwidth, and also just frankly plumbing and engineering to be there too. Instead, you can host models and applications right at the edge on top of that infrastructure and save a whole lot of money.
So this is leads into an interesting sort of narrative we had previously about ad tech companies not trying to solve every single problem. It goes back to the unbundling piece. And it fits nicely into this cloud infrastructure. Like instead of building every aspect of ad tech, there is a new wave of companies just focusing on a specific specialism, right? Used to call them derogatory, features, not companies, right? So what you're seeing more of these companies, if you take out that cost of compute, that cost of infrastructure, it frees up companies to do new stuff. When you talked about Chalice, 59As, all those type of companies that sort of are, custom algo companies, and then we have all the signal businesses that kind of emerging. Talk about that sort of aspect of ad tech. Like there is now, you could have a demarcation of specialism.
Yeah, it's happening rapidly, and it's exciting. To some degree, if you just take the base acronym that we live within, like the demand-side platforms and sell-side platforms, the word platform is in that name. And a platform by very nature should be self-supporting of an ecosystem around it. Quite frankly, the economic value on top of the platform should far exceed that which the platform consumes. I think in ad tech, we've been stuck in this rut where platforms get a little bit greedy. When there's a new problem or a new opportunity or new feature to add, they add it. They try to solve every problem. They try to exact more and more fees and margins. I think that model is also on its way out, where you can't imagine one platform can solve 1,000 problems when there are specialty companies that frankly can do it better with more focus. And when we start to remove any of the friction to access and hit scale, which we've been doing now by building on top of the infrastructure, when we change the economics, you can actually compel companies to rise rapidly and do everything better in a more modularized way. So yeah, I'd say if anything, the platform era of ad tech hasn't actually kicked off yet. We're just getting started in it. And I think historically the platforms in ad tech were not platforms at all, but we're really just trying to solve every problem and get all the credit. And I think the market's moving on from that.
Okay, interesting. We've got time for one more question, I think. Sort of like we've touched on search AI, chatbots, collapse of the lower funnel. Like, let's talk about the open internet. Like Zuckerberg just wants to take our money and just spend it on Meta because he thinks we're not, advertising is not possible anymore or not needed because in the age of AI. Let's talk about that for a minute. Like, let's talk about the viability of the open internet. We did that sketch this morning around sort of that mid to upper funnel and like how human interaction or creating human need in a product is going to be even more important than it was ever before. So let's just discuss that with the last 1 minute and 50 seconds we have left.
Absolutely. Well, what I would say is, despite all the headlines and certainly all the chatter, outside of just the open internet, the web itself is still absolutely enormous. We see it every single day. We sit at the edge of the internet. It's really big. Have there been changes? Absolutely. There's a multi-year study that our analytics team is currently going through right now that I've seen some of the early results from, and we are seeing a have and have not dynamic play out, at least across the exchange and across the open internet. There are publishers and categories today that are in decline. And so one cohort of publisher that we see across the exchange, specifically on the open web, is down 27% year on year on inbound traffic, which is significant. And a lot of that is topical-based publishers that have seen themselves collide with overviews and AI-generated answers. On the other side, though, there's another cohort of publisher across the exchange that's up 41% year over year. And if you balance the two, a lot of it is in news. A lot of it is breaking news. A lot of it is also just content with, kind of humans, trusted humans and brands behind instead of just random blogs that historically have filled out a lot of search queries. That cohort's up 41% year over year. When you put the two together, the web is still in growth, just at modest growth. But I would just say we're seeing shifts, and the impacts are not universal. That's the web, though. We also have app, we also have streaming, we also have other elements of the open internet, which are still growing very comfortably. Streaming is still, at least in the US specifically, exploding right now. And so like on the whole, we have a very, very big universe to address. For us, when we think of this collectively, we do think of the open internet as challenged. And so, to your Zuck comment,
they're not ad people. Like Zuckerberg is a guy whose entire business is supported by advertising, but he hates it. He looks at the mirror and thinks he's a tech guy. He's an advertising guy, right? He's a bloody ad network.
He is. And so what I would say is the internet is just fine, and we're still coming for Zuck.
Brilliant. And on that note, let's finish up. Thanks so much, Andrew. Brilliant conversations there. Thank you very much.